Hello and welcome to another video review. This is Homefront for PC, Xbox 360, and PlayStation 3. This is a first-person shooter by Chaos Studios, and Digital Extremes worked on the PC version. It was published by THQ in 2011 and was preceded by a pretty massive hype campaign that ultimately fell flat on its face. The main problem being that it generated a lot of confusion, because in the game they actually have simulated declarations of war in media and such. There's a lot of references to things that actually exist, and the game is set in 2027, but the ad campaign only aired these weird declarations and such like that, and people were actually very confused. They thought it might actually be real, but of course it wasn't. It's just an ad campaign for the game, and so people got very confused by this. If they weren't gamers anyway, they didn't have any idea what was going on, and so there was a lot of confusion with that. It ended up getting banned in South Korea, of course, because of the subject matter of the game, which I'll get to in a moment. It was billed as being written by John Milius, who wrote Red Dawn, if you remember that. That was a movie about the Soviets invading the U.S. It was made back in the 80s. I believe it was a book beforehand, but I'm not 100% sure on that. But I personally just did not like that movie at all. So this wasn't really a boon for me. But it came out later on that the former employees of Chaos Studios, because they shut down, actually credit C.J. Kirshner, who is one of their employees, with writing the entirety of Homefront, and John Milius not having written anything. So it's kind of weird how this thing worked out. And it didn't sell very well when it was released. I mean, it did sell better later on when it went on sale and such like that, across all systems, of course. But it still ended up with the developer just going under, and the sequel being developed by Crytek instead. It's just kind of a weird mess of a game, and you kind of have to wonder what went wrong. Was it just the hype campaign failed to deliver with the actual product, or what exactly happened with this thing that made people just not like it so much? I mean, that's pretty much all you hear, is that Homefront is a terrible game if you talk to other gamers. And so, is it really a terrible game? Well, as far as presentation goes, it looks pretty average for the time being. That said, it is an Unreal Engine 3 game, and the maps are really, really big in this game. So they did actually pack a pretty massive amount of detail into the maps themselves. Things look pretty realistic for the most part. It's not all brown and gray. There is quite a bit of that, but it's also got other colors in there as well, and that was something that actually surprised me when I played this thing, because I'm used to my modern military FPSs being very brown and gray and supposedly realistic, and this one really isn't. I mean, there is a lot of brown and gray, don't get me wrong, but it's not that to the point where it's like, say, Medal of Honor, the new one, of course. So that was actually something that surprised me, and I quite liked that. That said, again, everything doesn't look particularly great. I mean, it doesn't look bad either. It's average modeling. The animations do their job, and that's kind of it. Some of them are a little bit fancy. They do actually have different reload animations for when you have an empty mag and a mag that actually has ammo in it, depending on the weapon, of course. There are some that they actually don't. The animations themselves are generally smooth and fluid. The just texture work is surprisingly well detailed and fairly high res on PC. I'm not sure about console, but on PC it looks fairly decent. PC does have DirectX 11 mode that you can turn on, and you can up the visuals up to 11, but the problem I have with DirectX 11 mode is that it just runs like crap compared to DirectX 9, and it really doesn't give you much bonus as far as the visuals go. I never noticed anything really different in DirectX 11 mode. So that's something to keep in mind. Anyway, the problem I had with the visuals was that sometimes it's kind of hard to determine what's an enemy and what's an environment, and so that's a little bit weird. And there's some environmental stuff that you think you can actually shoot through, but you can't, like fences for some bizarre reason. I don't know why you can't shoot through a lot of the fences in this game. It doesn't really make any sense, but you can't. There are some things where you think you can very clearly shoot over it, but you actually can't, and it doesn't make any sense at all. They really should have done something to fix that. I think that's more of a programming error than it is a graphics error, but it is an issue. And that said, even though the graphics quality is fairly good, it's not visually appealing. This sort of realistic kind of look really doesn't just appeal to the eye well at all. So you're really not going to be throwing any awards at this thing for the visuals. But on the sound design aspect, they actually did a pretty good job for the most part. Now, gun sounds can range between kind of pathetic and really awkward and such like that to actually pretty beefy and concussive, and that just really depends on what you're using. Because there are certain rifles that don't sound particularly beefy, but then there's the sniper rifles which do, and then there's the shotgun which just kind of sounds like a average shotgun, even though it's a ridiculously overpowered weapon, which I'll get to later on. But it's just all over the place in the sound effects, but the environmental stuff is actually really well done. There's a lot of really nice location sound going on, so they did a very good job with that. And the voice acting is generally pretty decent, too. They read their lines well. The problem is that the writing itself is an issue, so there's only so much that decent voice actors can do to actually bring up the writing, and they really didn't do a good job of that. Mostly because there's one character in particular who basically all he does is cuss the entire game, and there's really nothing else to his character except cussing and being angry and such. So that's pretty big of an issue when your characters have these personalities that are just very one-sided, and so you can only have so much decent voice acting there. It's kind of an issue. And then there's the music, which is decent, but the problem is that it's just kind of generic, action-y orchestra stuff. So, while it is decent music, it doesn't really pop out at you as being particularly impressive. So, as far as presentation goes, it's pretty decent quality, but at the same time, it's nothing that wows you. So the wow factor either has to come from the story or the gameplay, and the story in this one is, well, it's basically Red Dawn, only crappier, and substitute the Soviets with the Koreans. That's it. That's really all the story is. They did change up a few things here and there, like you play as a former U.S. Marine named Robert Jacobs, and the only really defining characteristic of him is that he used to be a pilot. That's it. That's the only reason the Resistance is even interested in him at all. And you never say anything throughout the game, so he never has a personality. You don't really give a crap about him. But even the other characters that you'll be running along and fighting alongside don't really have personalities either. You have Connor, who is the guy who never stops cussing, and he just yells obscenities at things all the time. And that's really his only defining characteristic. And you've got two other characters. I believe one of them's Hopper. I think that's his name anyway. I can't remember exactly. And his defining characteristic is that he's a nerd. He takes care of their tech stuff. And then you've got Rihanna, who's just there, and she's just there. And that's it. They're the only characters of note throughout the entire game, because the other ones that they introduce just kind of pop up for a short while, and they're just gone later. They don't appear again for some bizarre reason. And for some reason, people who are named generally don't last very long in terms of importance to the story. They just kind of pop in and they're like, okay, I'm going to go do something else now. And you never really get anything out of it. So that's a problem. On top of this, they made the enemy to be this ridiculous comic book enemy that's basically only concerned with wiping the floor with everyone. And really all they do the entire game is just commit atrocities against humanity, and that's it. They just herd people into concentration camps, they slaughter them in the streets for no particular reason, and you're just sitting there like, okay, we get it. They're doing horrible things. You don't have to remind us of that every 5 seconds. And they keep putting references into just all sorts of things, and they're kind of like, hey, look at me, I'm like Red Dawn, only crappy. And so the entire time you're playing this thing, you're just like, okay, story, you don't have to be the forefront here. And the problem with the story is that it is the forefront of the campaign. It's extremely linear, to the point where it almost puts games like Time Crisis to shame. It feels like it's on rails the entire time. You never feel like you have any choice whatsoever in anything that's going on. It's just go here, point at thing, click button, and watch things just happen on screen. That's kind of it. And it's an extremely short campaign, too. It's maybe 4 hours. I felt like it was more like 3.5, but it may be 4 hours. It's extremely short, and the conclusion is just abrupt, and you just sit there going, okay, this is obviously going to tie into a sequel, but we don't have the sequel yet. So it just doesn't really make a lot of sense, and the story ends up being an incoherent mess. And when you have such an incoherent mess of a storyline, the campaign suffers because it's extremely linear and extremely scripted. So everything has to happen in exactly this spot. And so half the game you're actually sitting there waiting for things to happen. Waiting for the AI to get up to a door that they need to kick down in order for you to progress. Waiting for them to say, hey, you can take out this target now. Or waiting for insert thing to happen so you can press a button and watch things happen. I mean, they don't even let you climb up ladders in the single player. You just press a button and watch your character do it. And the entire time you're just going, I don't care anymore. So the single-player campaign is one of the worst I've seen in a very, very long time. It is atrocious. And so the real meat of this game is in the multiplayer. Now, I did a My Thoughts on video for the demo of that, and I actually quite liked the multiplayer back then. And the demo gave me hope for the full game. It did have issues, don't get me wrong, but then I got my hands on the full game. And a lot of what I said in the My Thoughts on video still applies here. They have refined it a little bit. Some of the weapons are a little bit better balanced out, except for one, and I'll get to that in a moment. But there's one extremely big problem with this thing. It basically has two game modes, and those are Team Deathmatch and Ground Control. And Ground Control is basically like Conquest mode in Battlefield. And whenever you capture the points and you get enough of a score to win a round, it actually moves to a different section of the battlefield, and you actually have this push forward, push back kind of thing that is actually a pretty interesting way of doing things, and I like what that does. It gives this kind of dynamic feel to the gameplay. And so that's an interesting mechanic that I'm surprised they don't really do a lot more. I mean, you saw it in, say, Battlefield Bad Company 2, and of course Battlefield 3, but there's not a lot of other games that do something like that, and that's something fairly unique. And the game feels a little bit more like Battlefield than it does something like Call of Duty, because you have vehicles. Now, you spawn these vehicles when you actually go to spawn, and you spend battle points to get them. You get battle points by doing things throughout the game, like defeating enemies, or destroying drones, or just capturing points, or whatever. It doesn't matter. If you do something that is an objective in this game, then you get battle points for it. And you can spend these to either get vehicles on your next spawn, or you can buy these special slots that you get. You get 2 slots that you can put items in, like a flak jacket, which makes you take more damage before you go down, or various anti-vehicle weapons and such like that. So they do have a decent variety of things you can get, and it doesn't feel like, say, kill streaks, where it rewards you for just annihilating the enemy. It does do that, but you can do it by getting points from completing actual objectives as well, so it does encourage teamwork. But there are 2 major problems with this. The first problem is that the vehicles are extremely overpowered, especially the flying vehicles, namely the helicopters. They will just annihilate your team no matter what. And there's really not a lot you can do against them. You can try to shoot them down, but they are just not going to go down very easily. And it's extremely irritating when you're trying to spawn and you got somebody's stupid helicopter just camping your spawn, and, well, obviously you're getting annihilated. This happens a lot. In fact, it happens almost every single game, and it's extremely irritating. They also have the major problem of the shotgun, which is a DLC weapon. You have to pay to get this thing. It kills enemies in basically one hit every single time you shoot at something. And it doesn't really matter, because you do have a decent variety of weapons available to you, and these do have different advantages and disadvantages, but none of them are as powerful as that shotgun, because it can take out enemies at extremely long range. It can take them out at point blank in one shot. Long range, it'll take maybe 2 or 3. And there's really no downsides to it. I mean, you can hit things across the map with it that even a sniper rifle can barely hit, and it's ridiculous. So whenever you come across an enemy who is using one of those things, you're doomed. You're extremely lucky to survive the engagement, and even with a flak jacket, then you still go down in one hit. It is ridiculous. That thing is ungodly overpowered, and they really shouldn't have put it in there. Before they put it in there, the game was actually pretty well balanced as far as the infantry combat went, but when they put the shotgun in there, it completely broke the balancing, and suddenly whoever has the shotgun is going to win the game. It doesn't matter who's really got anything else, who's good with whatever. It's just you're going to win if you have guys with shotguns who can get enough points to get those helicopters and just spam them. So that's really what this game comes down to. It's really unfortunate because there is a lot of cool stuff with the gameplay. When you're not getting spammed by vehicles or shotguns, it's actually really, really fun. And it doesn't feel like just a generic Call of Duty clone or something like that. But that vehicle spam just ruins the game. And that shotgun just breaks the multiplayer. So you have a single-player campaign that is just atrocious. It's horrible. There's no reason really to play it at all. And you have multiplayer that would be great, actually, if it weren't for that stupid shotgun and vehicle spam. Now, you can turn off the vehicles, actually, based on the server, but still, it's just a mess. And I don't know what they were thinking with it. And it's sad because there was so much potential with this thing. They could have done so much. They could have made it an open world FPS very easily, and it would have been a very unique experience. Maybe make it something like Red Faction Guerrilla. But no, instead you get extremely generic Call of Duty style scripted single player, and it's terrible. And you get multiplayer that could have been great, but it's broken. Hence why it gets a 1.5 out of 5. Thanks for watching.